The jungle breathed. It was August 14th, 1944, the island of Guam. The air hung thick with moisture and rot, every breath tasting of salt and decomposing vegetation. Corporal Daniel Reeves crouched behind a shattered palm trunk, his M1 Garand pressed against his chest. Around him, the 3rd Marine Division had ground to a halt. They were pinned. Ahead, through the twisted mass of ferns and mahogany roots, lay the Fingayan Valley. Intelligence had called it lightly defended. The maps showed a clear approach to the northern airfield. Command had promised swift passage, but the maps were wrong, the intelligence was wrong, and now 512 men were trapped in a corridor of death. The Japanese had turned the valley into a masterpiece of concealed firepower. Type 92 heavy machine guns nested in cave mouths, invisible from aerial reconnaissance. Mortar teams occupied the high ground, their tubes angled perfectly to rain steel on any advance. Spider holes dotted the jungle floor, each one camouflaged with such precision that Marines stepped over them before rifle fire erupted from below. Reeves had watched 3 squads try to push forward that morning. Each time, the same result. The first burst of gunfire came from nowhere. Men dropped. The advance stalled. Medics crawled forward under covering fire that did nothing to suppress an enemy they couldn't see. Then the mortars found range, and the retreat began. 12 Marines dead, 27 wounded. The attack hadn't covered 50 yards. Captain Harlow gathered his platoon leaders in a crater still smoking from a naval bombardment 2 days prior. His face was grey with exhaustion and something deeper. Reeves recognized it. The weight of impossible orders. "We move at 1400 hours, Harlow said. "Full battalion push, artillery prep for 10 minutes, then we advance on line." Lieutenant Morrison stared at the map spread across a crate of ammunition. "Sir, we don't know where their positions are. We're firing blind." "Those are the orders." "We'll be slaughtered." Harlow's jaw tightened. "I know." Reeves said nothing. He was 23 years old. Before the war, he'd worked as a surveyor in Montana, measuring land for the Forestry Service. He understood terrain, he understood sightlines, and he understood that 500 men were about to walk into a killing field because no one could see what waited in that valley. The briefing ended. Reeves returned to his position and checked his rifle for the 4th time that hour. The action was smooth. 8 rounds in the clip, 1 in the chamber. It didn't matter. You couldn't shoot what you couldn't see. He looked across the line. Young faces, farm boys and factory workers, men who trusted their officers to lead them somewhere other than oblivion. In 6 hours, most of them would be casualties, not because they lacked courage, because they lacked information. The jungle breathed. Somewhere in its depths, machine guns waited in darkness, manned by soldiers who had turned invisibility into doctrine. Reeves closed his eyes, listened. The distant crack of rifle fire, the low murmur of men checking equipment, the rustle of leaves in wind that barely existed. When he opened them again, he was staring at the valley, at the green wall that concealed everything, at the problem no amount of firepower could solve. And slowly, quietly, an idea began to form. The pattern revealed itself in blood and repetition. Every advance followed the same sequence. Marines moved forward in squad columns, using cover where they could find it. For the first 30 yards, nothing happened. The jungle remained silent. Men began to hope. Then the first machine gun opened fire, followed immediately by 2 others in perfect crossfire. The initial burst always came from the left flank, always. 3 seconds later, the right side erupted. By the time Marines hit the ground and tried to return fire, mortar rounds were already in the air. Reeves had witnessed it 5 times now, 5 separate attempts over 2 days. The Japanese weren't reacting to the attacks. They were executing a rehearsed sequence, timed and coordinated with mechanical precision. He sketched the engagement zone in his notebook. not with military symbols, but with surveyor's marks, elevation lines, angles of fire, dead ground where men could move unseen. The problem became clear in graphite and paper. The Marines were attacking blind. The Japanese weren't. Every enemy position had interlocking fields of fire. Every machine gun could support its neighbor. The mortar crews worked from pre-registered coordinates, dropping shells on predetermined kill zones. It was a system, and systems had patterns. Reeves approached Lieutenant Morrison after the third failed assault. The lieutenant was 26, a school teacher from Pennsylvania who'd volunteered the day after Pearl Harbor. He sat on his helmet, staring at nothing. "Sir, permission to speak." Morrison looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Go ahead, Corporal. I need to go in alone." "What?" "Into the valley, alone. Tonight?" Morrison stood. "That's suicide." "No, sir. It's reconnaissance. We're fighting blind. Someone needs to map their positions. We have patrol units, scouts. We had scouts. They're dead or they turned back. Sir, I was a surveyor. I know how to read terrain. I know how to move through it without being seen. And I know how to document what I find." Morrison shook his head. "Even if I authorized it, you'd never make it back. That valley is a fortress. It's a fortress because we keep attacking where they're strongest. If I can identify their positions, we can find the gaps. Every defensive line has them. We just need to know where to look. And if they catch you..." Reeves didn't answer immediately. They both knew what capture meant in the Pacific Theater. The Japanese didn't take prisoners lightly, and lone infiltrators were considered spies. "Then I won't come back," Reeves said quietly. "But the maps will." Morrison studied him. "What maps?" Reeves pulled his notebook from his pack, opened it to the sketches he'd been making. Elevation contours, sight lines, suspected firing positions marked with question marks. "I'll mark everything I see, every gun position, every cave entrance, every spider hole. Then I'll work my way back through dead ground they can't cover. If something happens to me, send a patrol to recover the notebook. It'll be in my pack." "This is insane." "Sir, in 6 hours we're launching a full assault, 500 men. We both know what'll happen." Morrison looked toward the valley. The afternoon sun slanted through the canopy, turning the jungle into layers of shadow and pale green light. Beautiful and lethal. "I can't authorize this," Morrison said finally. "I'm not asking you to, sir. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Corporal, if it works, you can claim you ordered it. If it doesn't, you can say I disobeyed orders and went rogue. Either way, you're covered." Morrison closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed in his expression. Resignation, perhaps, or the terrible clarity that comes from running out of options. "You have until 500. If you're not back by then, we advance without you." "Understood, sir." "And Reeves?" "Sir? Come back. That's an order." Reeves nodded. He didn't promise. Promises were for men who believed in certainty, and certainty was a luxury no one carried into the jungle. He went in at 2300 hours. No moon, cloud cover thick enough to choke the stars, the kind of darkness that pressed against the eyes like a physical weight. Reeves had stripped his gear down to essentials: rifle slung across his back, K-bar knife on his belt, notebook and pencil in a waterproof pouch, canteen, half full to minimize noise. No helmet, no grenades, nothing that could rattle or reflect light. He'd blackened his face and hands with mud from a shell crater, wrapped cloth around his boots to muffle his footsteps, moved his dog tags inside his shirt so they wouldn't clink. Every piece of equipment became a potential betrayal. The perimeter guards watched him pass, said nothing. They knew what he was doing. Men didn't move toward the enemy at night unless they were hunting or hunted. The jungle swallowed him within 10 yards. Sound became everything. Reeves moved in a crouch, each step deliberate. Test the ground with his front foot. Shift weight slowly. Listen, wait, move again, progress measured in feet per minute, rather than yards per hour. The canopy above him formed a second darkness, so complete that he navigated by touch and memory. 50 yards in, he found the first body. A Marine from yesterday's assault, still in position behind a fallen log, rifle aimed forward. Death had come from the left. The angle of trauma made that clear. Reeves marked the location in his notebook, sketching the sight lines. The machine gun had been positioned to catch anyone using this exact piece of cover. He moved on. The jungle floor was a maze of roots and sinkholes. Ferns grew head-high in places, their fronds creating natural corridors. Reeves followed these when he could, using the vegetation as concealment. But vegetation could hide threats as easily as soldiers. Every shadow might conceal a spider hole. Every fallen trunk might shelter a Japanese rifleman on night watch. He counted his paces, 230 from the perimeter. The terrain began to rise. He was entering the valley proper now, moving through the kill zone where 5 assaults had failed. Somewhere ahead, machine guns waited in their caves. Mortars sat in their pits. Men slept in shifts, confident in their defensive positions. Reeves stopped, listened. Voices, Japanese, low and conversational, perhaps 20 yards to his right. He couldn't see them, couldn't risk moving closer, but their presence told him something important. This area was secure enough for casual talk, which meant he was behind their forward positions. He adjusted his mental map. The defensive line bent here, angling to follow the high ground. He was inside the curve now. If he moved carefully, he could observe their positions from behind. The voices faded as he crept past. His heart hammered against his ribs. Each beat so loud he was certain it would give him away. But the jungle was full of sounds. Insects, frogs, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. One more sound meant nothing. 300 paces, the ground leveled. Through a gap in the ferns, Reeves saw the first cave mouth. It was smaller than he expected, a natural fissure in the volcanic rock, maybe 4 feet high. But the vegetation around it had been cleared with surgical precision, creating interlocking fields of fire across the valley floor below. A Type 92 machine gun sat just inside the entrance, its barrel angled downward. 2 ammunition cans beside it. The crew was invisible in the darkness, but he could hear them. The scrape of metal on stone. A cough, quickly suppressed. Reeves marked it in his notebook, drew the angles, noted the cleared fire lanes. This position covered the entire left flank of the American advance route. No wonder every attack had stalled. He moved on, found 2 more caves within 50 yards of the first, each one positioned to support the others, each one invisible from below until the shooting started. The Japanese had spent weeks preparing this defense. Months, perhaps. Every position had been surveyed and registered, every tree cleared to create killing ground. It was meticulous, professional, and it explained why 500 Marines couldn't advance 50 yards. 400 paces now. Reeves was deep inside the defensive zone. The caves were behind him. Ahead, the terrain dropped into a ravine. This would be where the mortars operated. High ground, protected approaches, clear line of sight to pre-registered targets. He crawled to the edge and looked down. 5 mortar pits, Type 97 tubes. Crews sleeping beside their weapons, ready to fire within seconds of an alert. Ammunition stacked in wooden crates, fused and ready. A communications trench connected the pits to an observation post higher up the slope. Reeves sketched it all. His hand moved quickly now, recording what he saw before the darkness or his luck ran out. Every position, every weapon, every gap in their coverage. Because there were gaps, there always were. The left flank couldn't cover the ravine. The mortars had dead ground directly below them. The machine gun positions were vulnerable from the rear if approached through the jungle's thickest cover. He was mapping not just their strength, but their weakness. 500 paces. Time to leave. He'd been inside their lines for nearly 2 hours. Dawn was still distant, but patrols might change. Sentries might rotate. The longer he stayed, the greater the risk. Reeves turned. Began the careful journey back. He'd covered maybe 50 yards when the voices stopped him. Japanese, multiple soldiers, moving through the jungle directly ahead. A patrol, probably checking the perimeter before dawn. He froze, pressed himself against a tree trunk. They were close, too close. He could hear their equipment, the clink of rifles, the soft rustle of cloth. They passed within 10 feet of his position. 4 soldiers, alert and scanning the jungle. If any of them had turned his direction, if any of them had looked down instead of forward, it would have ended there, but they didn't. They moved on. The sounds faded. Reeves waited, counted to 100, moved again, 600 paces. He was out of the main defensive zone. The jungle thinned. Ahead, through the trees, he could see the faint glow of American positions, foxholes, guard posts, safety. He crossed the perimeter at 04 mile for 7 hours. Lieutenant Morrison was waiting. Jesus Christ. Corporal, I thought you were dead. Reeves handed him the notebook. Their entire defense, positions, weapons, gaps, it's all there. Morrison opened it. Even in the pre-dawn darkness, he could see what Reeves had drawn. A complete tactical map, precise, detailed, the kind of intelligence that changed battles. How many? Morrison asked quietly. Positions, 17 machine guns, 5 mortar pits, maybe 40 spider holes, all interlocking, all pre-registered. My God! But, sir, there's a way through. The left ravine. They can't cover it without exposing their mortar crews. If we hit them from there, while the main force demonstrates on the right, we can roll up their entire flank. Morrison studied the map. This is, Corporal, this is incredible. It's what needed to be done. Captain Harlow needs to see this. Immediately. They ran to battalion command. The artillery preparation began at 0600 hours, but this time it was different. Every shell had a purpose. Every barrage targeted a specific position marked in Reeves's notebook. The caves, the mortar pits, the spider hole clusters. Naval gunfire walked across the valley floor, guided by coordinates transcribed from hasty sketches made in darkness. Captain Harlow had studied the map for 11 minutes without speaking. Then he'd called for his platoon leaders. Then the artillery liaison. Within 30 minutes, the entire attack plan had changed. The main force would demonstrate along the right flank, drawing attention and fire. A reinforced platoon, volunteers only, would move through the left ravine, approaching from the one angle the Japanese couldn't effectively cover. Once they breached the perimeter, they'd attack the machine gun positions from behind while the main force pressed forward. It was exactly the kind of maneuver that required detailed intelligence. The kind intelligence they'd never had before. The kind 500 men were about to stake their lives on. Reeves insisted on going with the flanking force. Morrison tried to refuse. Harlow overruled him. He drew the map, the captain said. He knows the terrain. If anyone can guide them through, it's him. At 0630, the bombardment lifted. Silence rushed in to fill the space where thunder had been. Then whistles blew. The assault began. The main force moved forward in waves. As predicted, Japanese machine guns opened fire. The familiar pattern beginning. But this time, American mortars had counter-battery coordinates. Within seconds, smoke and high explosive rained on the cave mouths. The suppressive fire wasn't random. It was surgical. On the left flank, Reeves led 43 Marines into the ravine. They moved in single file, using the dead ground exactly as he'd mapped it. The terrain rose steeply, forcing them to climb over boulders and through dense underbrush. But no machine gun fire reached them. No mortar rounds fell nearby. They were in the blind spot. The gap in the fortress. 200 yards. They emerged behind the Japanese mortar line. The crews were focused forward, dropping rounds on the American main assault. They never heard the Marines climbing the slope behind them, never saw the rifles aiming at their backs. Lieutenant Morrison gave the signal. 43 Marines opened fire simultaneously. The effect was catastrophic. Mortar crews fell. Ammunition exploded. Survivors fled down the communication trenches, right into the advancing main force. Within 3 minutes, 5 mortar positions had been neutralized. Reeves pointed toward the cave line. "Machine guns are next. Follow me." They moved through the jungle at a run now. No need for stealth. The entire defensive plan was collapsing. Japanese soldiers retreated from positions that had seemed impregnable minutes before, abandoning weapons and ammunition in their haste to reach secondary lines. The Marines hit the first cave from behind, cleared it with grenades and rifle fire. The machine gun fell silent. They moved to the next cave, then the next. Each position marked in Reeves's notebook, each one vulnerable from the rear approach. On the valley floor, the main force advanced. For the first time in 3 days, they weren't pinned down, weren't slaughtered in crossfire. The Japanese defense had been built on concealment and interlocking fire. Take away the concealment, break the interlocking fields, and it shattered like glass. By 0800 hours, the Finagayan Valley was secure. The cost had been remarkably light. 7 Marines killed in the assault, 19 wounded. In a battle that should have produced hundreds of casualties, 512 men had walked through a fortress because one surveyor had spent a night mapping shadows. Reeves sat against a shattered palm trunk, the same one he'd hidden behind the day before. His hands shook from exhaustion and adrenaline. Around him, Marines moved through captured positions, securing weapons and treating wounded. Lieutenant Morrison found him there, sat down beside him without speaking. They watched the sun climb over the jungle canopy, turning the morning mist golden. "You saved us," Morrison said finally. "All of us." Reeves shook his head. "Yeah, I just drew a map." "You did more than that." "Maybe." They sat in silence. There was nothing else to say. The battle was won. Men who should have been dead were alive. And somewhere in the jungle, the notebook that had made it possible was already being transcribed for the division intelligence files. Just another day in the Pacific War. Just another problem solved through courage and precision. Just another surveyor doing what surveyors do, measuring ground. Finding paths. Turning impossible terrain into something that could be crossed. The official after-action report filed by the 3rd Marine Division on August 15, 1944, attributed the successful assault on Finagayan Valley to exemplary reconnaissance and tactical innovation. The report praised the coordination between artillery and infantry elements, noted the effective use of terrain, and recommended that similar reconnaissance in force operations be considered for future operations. Corporal Daniel Reeves received a Bronze Star for valor. The citation mentioned his voluntary reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines, resulting in actionable intelligence that significantly reduced friendly casualties. It did not mention the 5 hours spent alone in darkness, did not describe the caves and machine guns he'd mapped by sound and shadow, did not capture the moment when 500 men realized they might actually survive. Medals never do. The notebook itself was copied 3 times. One version went to division headquarters, another to Marine Corps intelligence for study and potential doctrinal application. The third remained with the 3rd Marine Division's operations staff, used to train subsequent reconnaissance teams in the fine art of mapping enemy positions without dying in the process. Reeves returned to his unit, fought through the rest of the Guam campaign, survived Iwo Jima 9 months later, though that was a different kind of hell. When the war ended, he went back to Montana and resumed his work with the Forestry Service, measuring land for timber companies and conservation projects. He rarely spoke about the war. When pressed, He would mention the cold of the Pacific nights, the weight of wet jungle air, the particular green of tropical vegetation. He never mentioned the valley, never described what it felt like to crawl through an enemy defensive line while machine guns slept in darkness 10 yards away. Some things didn't translate into civilian language. Lieutenant Morrison became a high school principal in Pennsylvania. He kept a copy of Reeves's map in his desk drawer, tucked inside a folder labeled Important Documents. Once a year, on August 14th, he would take it out and study the lines and angles, remembering the morning when impossible became possible because one man refused to accept that 500 others had to die. Captain Harlow wrote a letter to Reeves in 1963, shortly before his own death from cancer. It contained only 3 sentences. "I've commanded men for 23 years. I've seen courage in every form it takes. What you did that night was the finest act of soldiering I ever witnessed." The letter arrived 2 days after Harlow's funeral. Reeves read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in the Bible his mother had given him when he enlisted. He never spoke of it to anyone. The Marines who survived the Finagayan assault scattered after the war. Some stayed in touch, most didn't. But every man who'd been there carried the same knowledge. They should have died in that valley, should have been cut down in crossfire, buried in jungle mud, added to the casualty lists that grew longer every day in the Pacific. Instead, they went home, had families, built lives, grew old in a world that never learned their names. All because a surveyor decided that the thing maps were meant to do, show the way through impossible terrain, could work even when the terrain was darkness, and the impossible was 500 men surviving a fortress. 68 years later, the U.S. National Archives declassified the 3rd Marine Division's August 1944 intelligence files. Among them was a hand-drawn tactical map of Finagayan Valley, annotated in pencil, showing 17 machine gun positions, 5 mortar pits, and 43 spider holes. The drafter's name appeared in the corner, CPLD, Reeves. No one noticed it. The file was digital now, accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Just another document in an endless ocean of military records, just another map from a war long finished. But the lines were still precise, the angles still accurate, and somewhere in those carefully drawn elevations and sightlines was the ghost of a night when one man walked into hell with nothing but a pencil and the absolute certainty that knowledge was worth any risk. The jungle breathed. The jungle killed. The jungle swallowed 500 men and prepared to digest them slowly, methodically, according to a plan laid with machine gun fire and interlocking fields of death. And one surveyor, who understood that every fortress has gaps, went in alone to find them. The record remains, the map endures, the names fade, but 512 men went home.